talked a little bit about myself, but there is going to be a slide in here for those folks on Zoom. I don't have to necessarily re-talk about myself, if that's the word. But tonight we're going to be talking about soil building. And my interest in collecting these materials to present to you about soil building are really through what's called permaculture, a permaculture lens. And permaculture has a lot of different, there's some stigma around what permaculture is, there's some confusion around what it is. I recently took a design certification course through Oregon State University through fall and winter. And I've been familiar with permaculture for a long time, but taking that course really helped me understand what it is permaculture is trying to accomplish. And so when I say we're looking at soil building in a permaculture lens, you can also closely interchange that word for regenerative, if you've heard like regenerative soil techniques. So what we're trying to do is build soil and build it for the long-term health of our ecosystem. And let's see, what else do I want to say about permaculture? Permaculture is also including community and taking care of the earth. It's like a whole systems approach through gardening. And a lot of it is using perennials and fruit trees and things that we can harvest year round that can feed us, produce a yield, give us abundance in our lives, while also giving that to our ecosystem and environment and wildlife. So sharing that abundance with everyone. Okay. I said this already, you'll get this slide later so we can pass this. I'm a garden consultant and I've been gardening in Tucson in rental homes, so lots of container gardening. I've been in my home gardening for 5 or 6 years. I've also gardened everywhere that I've ever lived in some form. And I used to travel a lot. And so that was a lot of container gardening or installing a little garden at a rental that maybe I only had for 3 months. But I would go ahead and just say like, hey, landlord, landlady. And I've been gardening here for a while because I'm, just a little obsessed with it, as you all know. So that spans my entire, I've always been. Okay. So our goals for today, and we're going to keep going back to make sure I'm hitting these goals. And I also want to make sure I'm hitting the topics you all were curious about. So you'll have to, at the end, let me know if I haven't answered a question. So we're going to talk about what is soil. We're going to talk about soil rehabilitation and soil development. Troubleshooting soil problems, because that could probably take this whole entire conversation. But let's see if we can get the basics first. And then we're going to talk about maintaining healthy soils. So, that's fine. Okay, you can go next. All right, so what is soil? So soil is mainly comprised of these different, say, ingredients. And I always find the pie chart a nice visual sort of thing to help me see how much air and minerals and water are actually included in your soil as a component. When I would think of soil before sort of understanding some of these things, air and water, of course, they're part of soil, but I didn't really understand how important those things were. So in our desert soils, I put in this lower one, those on Zoom can probably see a little lip that tells you where it is. So the interesting thing in our desert soils, they're very mineral heavy, and we'll talk about mineral soil in a minute. We have a lot of air, a lot of porosity, still a great degree of water, which I think is surprising when you think of our dry soils. Now, all of these components can shift depending on our current conditions. So that slice of the pie chart might be a little less, as we have been very dry this summer and last winter. But the thing that's super interesting to me is that our organic material, which probably doesn't come to a surprise in this group, is really 1% or less. And organic material is that compost, leaf litter, any of that organic material you get, like say if you're in the Pacific Northwest, you have like the depth of that organic material and mix into the soils. And here we don't have very much of that. But if you're looking at a healthy soil profile, can really, these little pie pieces can stretch and bend, as you'll see in here. Hopefully I'm not moving around too much. But the organic material will move from say 3% as high as 25% organic material in your soil. And then you can see how important air is in having a healthy soil, and also the living matter. And you would also think in our desert soil, if you go out and dig a hole right now, that there's not a lot of living organisms in our desert soil. But that's not true. We actually still have a lot of living organisms in our soils in the desert. They're just adapted to our environment. They, they've evolved over the entire lifespan of the Earth, right? Let's see. Okay, we can go to the next. Okay, so I want to talk about mineral soil. So the mineral soil is comprised of 3 different parts, and you've probably heard of this before. And I like using the term mineral soil because it helps my brain, because there's also things called a soilless soil mix. So if you've heard something like here, use soilless mix in your raised beds, you can think that they're not actually talking about mineral soils. There might be like a sand component in a mineral or in a soilless soil blend, but they're not including these other parts, which is part of the makeup of our native soil here. So you're looking at your sand, which is very coarse. You think of beach sand, playground sand. Silt is very fine, finer than sand. And then clay is our super fine particles. And clay is also interesting because clay particles are flat. And so clay particles are adhere really well to each other. So that's why dry clay is very hard and made flake. And then when it does have water in it, it's holding onto that. It's so tight, and it folds onto materials really well, including organic materials like compost. Okay, for the next one, let's see what we have here. Okay, I have some tests that you can do. Has anyone done, say, a percolation test in their soil? Have you done a jar test in your soil? Some nods, some no's. Have you done a ribbon test in your soils? Okay, let's try. So these 3 methods, and I'll talk a little bit about how you can use each of these methods, can help you. Now the percolation test will help us. Help you learn more about your specific soil in your garden. So I have the soil texture chart here. And the first thing I'm going to just show you, because I have my example sitting on the ground right here, is how you do a jar test and what this is going to help you accomplish. So we want to find our percentage of each material. So we know if, say, we have a really sandy soil down here, I can help you read that in a minute. We'll see how this kind of goes here on soup and everything. It might be kind of hard for people to see. But this over here is the sandy soil in this region. And then towards the top is your percentage of clay in your soil. And then with your silt would be down in this region here. So we want to find where you fall in your garden on this soil chart so that you can know how fast your soil drains, how much water your soil holds naturally. If you're more on the clay side, which this spans even in our own Tucson basin. Some people have high clay content in their soils and they have a lot of water retention. Some people say that, I think it was the gentleman in Pantano Wash that you were talking about. If you are living sort of in a wash, you might have all sand, so you're going to have really fast draining soil. Ideally, in some dream world, which not a lot of people have, you'd be sitting right in the middle with this nice loam, a nice balance, all green. And then some people with the newer developments might have soil that is not native at all, that has been imported and laid as the foundation for their neighborhood. And then the houses were built on top of that. And so that is also like, oh, I wonder what that's. So you could be anywhere. It could be native soil, imported soil. You could be looking at your raised bed soils. So what you can do is take about a cup, take a jar that has about straight sides. You don't want too much curve in your jar. And then you're gonna fill it with about a cup of soil, and not the top layer of soil. You're gonna dig down, say about 6 inches, 6 to 8 inches, and you're gonna get a scoop. Now, if you have a lot of different areas in your garden, you can either collect a little bit from each area, or you can do multiple jar tests. So this is my vegetable garden, because I thought that was appropriate for my audience today. You can also do this in your landscape or other areas of your home to know your soil profile without having added a lot of organic material. So this is pretty dark because I've added a lot of compost and different types of organic materials over the years. But when I do this jar test with my native soil, it's very tan, like that other slide that I showed you, and it's like RGB sand. So be very hard to see. I can pass this jar around. It's pretty dark. I have to do the whole thing here where I like put my glasses up. So what you're looking on here, and you can see I have some rulers. You take a ruler and you're going to measure how much, what's your percentage of sand, and the sand is going to drop all the way to the bottom. And then you're going to see a layer of silt is the next layer on top of that. You're going to measure that. And then you're going to have right at the top, and it could take a long time because clay can suspend. It's such a fine particle. It can suspend in this water for a long time. So you can let this sit overnight until you can see this water gets more clear. And then you can measure your clay content, which is a very fine, and you can actually see those layers forming inside your jar. And so then you'll get a percentage of what your soil, and you'll like divide it. There's a little math I need to do here, and math on the spot for me is not my specialty. But you just need to divide this with the total to see what percentage of each layer you have. To go through on this chart and say you have, I think my soil here is, I have a really low percentage of clay, like I'm in the 10 to 12% clay. So I'm like right up here. And then I have a lot of sand. Like I have somewhere in the 70 to 80% sand where my garden is. And then in terms of silt, I have a very small amount of silt. So I'm like kind of up there in the 20 to 30. I know those percentages don't add up. But in the end, you draw a little line, and I'm in here with a sandy loam. So why that matters to me, and I can pass this around, let's get a set in the or it's pretty murky in the dark light. So how this relates to me with a sandy loam with very low clay content, and you'll see by the end I have like the too long didn't read kind of way to summarize this whole thing. Is I need to add something that's going to hold moisture because my soil drains really fast. When I dig a hole and I fill it with water to do my percolation tests, and you can look up percolation tests, or I could send a link for more instructions on how to do each of these things. When I dig a 1-foot hole, fill it with water, let it drain, fill it up again, and see how long is it going to take for that soil to drain. So I think my soil is somewhere like it drains 6 inches in like an hour, which is has a pretty good holding capacity. But say you have a high clay content, it might not drain for multiple hours at all, like 1 inch within say 6 hours. So for me, if that's draining within an hour, 6 inches, I know that I need some more ways in my vegetable gardens to hold on to that water. Now, if I'm planting native plants, they're actually going to really like that fast drainage for most native plants in our climate. They're going to like that fast drainage. So I don't want to like create more things that's going to hold onto water for those native plants. Okay. And then I did put just a little handhold. A lot of people don't travel around with jars. And so you can also do a ribbon test, which is you get your soil wet, kind of like a wet sponge, and then you squeeze it. And then you can see if you can roll it into a snake. If you have a high clay content, that snake, it'll hold its shape and you'll actually get a roll. Has anyone done that and had a lot of clay and you actually get a really nice snake? Was that here in Tucson? No. Yeah. And yeah, it's interesting because some people have a high degree of clay in their Tucson soils. It's all, you can really geek out and find out where there's like soil websites that you can look and find your soil profile, your geologic soil profile. To share that with you after. But it's variable depending on where you are. If you're in the Wash, if you're in the Kathleen Opeka, if you're down by Vail, if you're down by the Tucson Mountains, it's all variable. So, okay. I think we can go to the next slide. Do it. Okay, I have to talk about pH yet. How are we doing? Sometimes when I have I'm waiting for questions at the end, but like I don't even know. I don't even know. These guys look okay. All right. So in our local soils, or if you have experience gardening anywhere else, or if this applies to you in say Keith, I know is in Seattle. So his soil pH is probably very different than what we have here. So in our local soils, some people have taken a pH test for their water, for their soil. You can do all those fancy things. You can get those little soil pH tests on, like, the Amazon. You can get it at like your local stores. Everyone sells those things. However, most of the time we don't need that. We can really assume in our local soils, if you haven't added a soilless mix to some raised bed or containers, which it'll still be pretty high on the alkaline side, which I don't think is going to surprise anyone here. I'm sure you've heard that before. And that's because our water has a high pH, higher. Like ideally in our garden life, if we had everything we ever wanted, we'd be in the more 6.5. This would be really nice into the 7, the nice neutral. But where we are in Tucson with our water and our soil type, it's just high alkalinity. And so with those two things combined, we are going to be up here at 7.5, 7.6, up to maybe 8. I don't think we are often totally high, but if we're getting no rains, we're using a lot of city water to water our gardens, your pH could be inching up. And why does that matter? Is like, who cares what's happening with pH? What does that mean for my plants? So this chart here, you don't need to like memorize something like this. However, it is a really good idea of how nutrients can be taken up by roots of most plants, especially our vegetable garden plants, based on the alkalinity of the soil and water combination in our soils. And so you can see in 7.5, if we're in here with our soil pH, if you go look up at nitrogen, and you can see that big fat green line for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium. Our soils, our roots, our plants are able to still take up. There's like all these like exchanges happening within our roots that are like how the cells are able to kind of open up and accept nutrients from the soil based on like our pH being able to support that. So that's like whoa, that's like science U of A stuff. However, just knowing that your high pH does inhibit or support the ability for certain nutrients to be taken in. So I think I might have heard this question before, is like something about nutrients being absorbed by our plants. So you can see on some of these micronutrients down here, iron, manganese, boron, copper, zinc, you can see how it's getting small, and that higher pH is making it harder for those micronutrients to be taken up by the plant. And you might see some plant problems because of that. So what can you do to neutralize that? To reduce our alkalinity? Rain is such a blessing because rain is neutral and can really reduce that pH. And if we're not getting that rain, we're having a lot of trouble there because our city water is just what it is. So you can continue and try and acidify by adding organic material, which PS, that's like the secret trick to a lot of things right now is we need to keep adding organic materials to our soils to help neutralize some of these problems that we have with our water and stuff. Okay, we can go to the next one. I don't have a lot to say about this slide, but air and water, I really just wanted to touch back on that first pie chart. The porosity or the kind of fluffiness of your soil. Roots need oxygen to breathe, and they need oxygen to be able to have that exchange of nutrients between the roots, nutrients, the oxygen makes that all possible. If you think of a super compacted soil or a super waterlogged soil, takes out all of those little air pockets, reduces that porosity, and you can't take up nutrients. The roots cannot handle that sort of lack of oxygen environment. Certain plants like pond plants, plants that live in swamps, there are types of plants that can do that, but that's not usually what we're growing in our gardens. So if you do not have a lofty porosity, say heavy clay soil, or maybe you're trying no-till gardening and you're starting to get a lot of compaction, or you're starting with native soil on some of our disturbed soil surfaces, and it's heavily compacted, you're gonna lack oxygen. So you're gonna have to like find ways to include air and porosity in your soils. That's why people add like perlite or vermiculite. Mixing in rocks, like small rocks, sometimes helps with some of that porosity. Some people love lava rock as an amendment in their garden. Sand even. And then, well, I think we'll keep talking about it, but worms and grubs and burrowing animals, actually, as much as we don't like them, they can make our soil more lofty. So all of those squirrels that burrow around your landscape trees, they're actually able to bring in some air to some of that desert soil. So they're not all bad eating your plants. Okay. That's the next one. You can press again and see if I don't know where the visual went. Okay, imagine there's a Venn diagram. And we have, there's a physical Venn diagram for the physical characteristics of your soil. That's what we talked about in terms of texture, your clay content, sand content. And let's see, and then there's the chemical components of your soil. Sorry, I'm trying to like recreate the image.
Do you want me to go back one?
No, I think it just didn't come up. And I think that's okay. Yeah, go back. I think it had what I wanted to say. Oh, and then the living part of your soil, which is the biota. Sorry about that. So somebody had a question about the living aspect of our soil. So we have talked about the physical qualities, chemical qualities. We have been talking about nutrients. And we want to talk about the living portion of our soil, which is the biota, is one way to say it, biological side of it. And that's your microbes, your bacteria, your fungus, and your detrivores, or the grubs, your roly-polies, all of the things that eat and recycle stuff. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And we'll skip this slide. I'll talk about that later again. Okay, and I don't know, that.
No.
Go to the next one. We'll see if we get back on track here. Okay, we have talked a little bit about soil history. And so I wanted to talk about, I probably won't spend much time on this. However, it is important to know your own soil's history. So we talked about doing the jar test. And then it is important to know, say you're in a newer build, or even depending on when your house was built, like what's the history of your soil? Was it cleared out and then the house was put on, and so you're starting from scratch with your soil? Or did you just put the house there and very minimally impacted your soil? You have a big mesquite that's been collecting its organic, its leaves and its mulch throughout the years. Like, what is in your soil? And so I have a spot in my yard, just as an example, that I don't really know when we moved into our house. Nothing grew there, not even weeds. We do have a pool. I have little kids, and the pool is like a thing that's really helpful for us in the summer. And I think when they built that pool in the 80s, they took a big truck down there and like compacted that soil. And then I think they used a lot of weed killer, a lot of Roundup, maybe ground clear. I don't know what they were using. So it's been 5 years of turning the soil over in terms of adding native plants, plants that create biomass. We'll see that in a minute. Biomass is just plants that grow vegetation really quick, and you can cut it down, and then you can just lay it on the ground. And so it's kind of creating its own mulch in a rapid pace, because the geologic scale of our mesquites and Palo Verde, if we wait for them to all collect their natural organic materials on our soils, it's going to take us a very long time. So for us to rehabilitate our soils, we want to speed up that process. So we can do that by planting plants that have a lot of vegetation really quick and do well in disturbed soils. So we talked a little bit about gardening time. I'm hitting on all those stuff things. I think I'll talk mulch in a little bit. Okay, why does ecological successions have a place in our vegetables? So ecological succession this was pretty interesting for me to learn about this in terms of my vegetable garden. So when we're looking at our growing annual plants in our vegetable plants, they are typically an early succession type of plant. They are annuals, they live in one cycle. They die, they reseed all in the first year. They're very productive. They create a lot of leafy material, a lot of biomass. And that kind of behavior in plants can rehabilitate a disturbed area pretty quickly. And so if you think of that like, oh, okay, my garden is I need to continue to disturb this environment in a way to keep things, because that's what these types of plants have adapted to. And of course, our vegetables have been cultivated and evolved to serve our purposes for many years. But anyways, I always thought that was pretty interesting. If you think of some of these examples of our pioneer species for us in the Sonoran Desert, desert broom, a plant that loves to be hated. Triangle leaf, fir sage, and brittle bush are 3 plants as an example of things that are early on in ecological succession. And then as you move into a climax community, so if you're thinking about this in terms of permaculture, your climax community would be a community that is worked to maintain itself on its own. So a lot of large trees, perennials, deciduous trees. And if you're wanting to have a climax community incorporated into your home, your yard, and incorporate some of those ideas, you're going to look at food-bearing crops that are actually the perennials in our, like mesquite, hackberry, saguaro fruit, prickly pear. Chiltepine is actually more on this scale, but you do find it in our more developed. Okay, we can keep going.
What's the bed?
Oh, I'm sorry. It was kind of like mid to late succession.
Oh.
Yeah. Is that interesting? Okay, we're like, so like maybe I'll kind of breeze through that part there. Okay, so another interesting thing for us in terms of our annual vegetable gardens, when we think of what kind of living organisms are helpful for us, our gardens are usually disturbed soils. Vegetable gardens can be more bacterial dominated. And if you're thinking more orchards, perennial gardens, perennial edibles, those are more fungally dominated because of the time it takes to develop those networks. So in a disturbed area, if you think of some disturbed areas in our Sonoran Desert, and actually the Sonoran Desert is mostly bacterial dominated, and that's why we have a lot of nitrogen fixing plants. They can fix their own oxygen from the atmosphere and turn that into their own fertilizer from the roots because they can't get that through a more fungally dominated, and that would be like microbes in the network there. So that's why you see a lot of nitrogen fixing plants in our in the Sonoran Desert. See, so let's see. We'll keep going. Let's go to the next. Oh yeah, I just said that. Trick question. The Sonoran Desert, if you're working on our soils in your vegetable gardens, you can get to a more fungally dominated because we are adding a lot of organic material. But our Sonoran Desert is still heavy bacterial dominated soils. Yeah. Okay, we talked about that. We can do peach trees here, but I don't know how many people live in a place that looks like this one over here, which would be highly fungal dominated because of the amount of perennials, the amount of organic material that collects naturally, the amount of precipitation they have existing in their climate there. I actually think that might be in Japan. I'm not sure I remember. Okay. And that's my lunch tree there. Doesn't matter. Okay, so you're like, this presentation was too long. I didn't watch it. I forgot a bunch of stuff. So what's my takeaway point? If you have whatever soil problem in general you're having, you can usually correct this soil problem by adding organic material. So this also blew my mind a little bit because I have a fear of clay soil. I don't have clay soil. Sometimes I wish I had a little more, but in a real clay soil environment, it pulls so much moisture and it's so hard to get that porosity. It can be so waterlogged. I'm like afraid of that. But you can fix even a clay soil by adding lots of organic materials. We'll talk about some organic matter here. Okay. So when we are improving our soil fertility, what we're actually doing is we're feeding the living organisms. We're feeding that network, the biology, the microbes, the worms, we're feeding the detritivores, everything that goes into this, we're feeding that living network. You're not actually, you like feed the soil, so the soil can feed the plants. So you want to think about it in that ways. Okay, so ways you can improve your soil fertility, you want it to be a diverse array of strategies. I think a lot of us rely on compost, and there are a lot of different ways to accomplish them. So compost is great, whether you compost on your own, or you purchase your compost, or however you get your compost, it's great. Keep at it, mix it in. Let's get that compost in. Manures. You can add manures. I have another slide. I won't go there yet, but there's different levels of heat in manures. And so you're pretty safe with like a small mammal manure, say like a rabbit manure. Even sheep and goat is pretty mild to put directly in your gardens. But if you have like a large mammal, an ungulate, like a horse or a cow, you're going to need to let that rest and compost it before you apply it in your gardens. But manures are a great way if you have a source. And I think Barrel sometimes sells sheep manure for us. That's a great resource. If you ever see her offering on for sheep manure, go and grab some. And incorporate it. It can really heat up your compost pile as well. It's a great trick in your compost pile. Okay, mulching. That's 10 yards of mulch that I have. If you've heard of chip drop, you can get free arborist chips. Sometimes it's a blessing and a curse because you can get really interesting materials. However, if you need free mulch, and I was converting like my gravel parking lot into more of an orchard, I needed a lot of organic material for that. And so I layer compost, I layer manures, I layer mulch, and I'm growing a lot of biomass. I'm growing lots of plants that put vegetation up really quick, and I can chop it down, I can lay it on the soil, and then I'm just trying to build that soil up on its own. To improve the fertility there, because otherwise it's like almost concrete. Okay, you can go to the next one. So I know compost is like a whole class on its own. So it's like, what do I want to talk about compost? Really, I wanted to talk about there are lots of different ways to compost. Compost doesn't have to be perfect. If you are shy about who has a compost pile here? Who of us are composting? Yeah, so most of us are comfortable, even if it's not the best compost pile in the world. Like sometimes it dries out and it's not doing anything. Well, it's still gonna break down over time. We can always make it better. So please just try and compost. Find some method that's gonna work for you, and I'm sure there's a class on that soon. Okay. You can also do anaerobic composting, and someday maybe I'll teach a bokashi class. But this is a strategy of composting waste that isn't produce. So you might, I have little kids and they bring their lunches home and it's like all sandwiches, crackers, mushy crackers they didn't eat, or the pasta they didn't finish. I had to find a way to use this waste. And so I started using an anaerobic, which means lack of air, composting system with bokashi. And you throw that in your compost pile once you like get to the certain point. And it heats up and it can make your compost rapidly, so you can heat it up fast. Okay. And then worm composting is another way to increase your amount of composting. You can compost right in your beds with worms, you can have a worm bin, there's lots of different ways you can use composting, but I love just having the worms in beds. It's really easy for me. Okay, good. Okay, a note on manures. I talked about like the heat. So this is, if you're gonna do manures, just do a little bit of research. Know who you're getting your manures from. Because you wanna know what the diet of those animals has been, even a little bit. Even if it's just like, just tell me a little bit about what you feed, because you don't wanna be all like, when you feed, you're like, I'm looking for some free manure. And you're like, tell me what they're saying. But really, what I'm looking for, I want to know if they're eating Bermuda grass personally. That's a weed seed I don't want to incorporate in my garden, so I'm very careful about that. So you might want to do a little bit of research on the farm that you're going to get your manures from. Okay. Chicken is a hot manure, you want to compost that first, but it can really heat up your compost, that's great. Sheep and goat is more gentle. I like to put sheep and goat manure on the edge of the drip line of my fruit trees. And then if I'm planting it in my garden, I usually let that sit a little bit. Although I'm experimenting just adding it directly on, because I don't always have time for that. Okay, and rabbits. If you have, I have a lot of resident rabbits that are wild, and they come in all over my garden and eat all my scents. But I really like how they poop all. Okay, you go to the next. Okay, mulch. I talked about mulch. There are just so many different ways you can mulch. You can use shredded newspaper. You can use shredded cardboard. You can mulch with arborist wood chips, which are free. You can call the arborist. You can call from a, I think Tanks is a good service that has wood chips. I'm sure like Acme and all the other places have wood chips to offer for sale if you just like need them right now. When I say chop and drop if you're not familiar, is just taking your plant and instead of like you chop it at the base, the plant is done, you leave the roots in the ground, maybe it's going to regenerate the plant. Maybe there's another season for the plant, it's just winter and so everything died. Or it's like your pepper is done and you just cut it as a base, leave the, you can leave the roots in there and you can just lay the plant material on top of your garden. You can chop it into smaller bits if you're in your annual vegetable beds. Or you can, sometimes I just leave the whole big thing in the basin of my fruit trees. Because I don't always have time to like chop the whole like bits. So it'll break down faster if it's straw as well. Straw, sometimes I use hay, it's a little more expensive and yeah, it's a little more seedy. But really with straw and hay, I find that it's pretty easy for me to weed those, but it's not for everyone. So you kind of have to decide if you're team straw, team hay, or not, because of the seediness of it. Oh, and then plants, we have this mulberry as one of the door prizes today. Plant deciduous fruit trees or deciduous trees. Our native trees are deciduous. And have something on your property you can collect as biomass. Okay, go to the next one. Oh, the critters. We have so many critters that are native. And then ones that we use a lot in our annual gardens, but they're actually not native, like our redweed, our redweeds. But I did want to make a note about grubs. Because grubs can actually, they're like kind of gooey, kind of like big and fat. And they get blamed a lot. They kind of have a bad rap. But they're actually our native detritivore. And so it's just breaking down organic material and making it usable for the plants. So, you know, if you can tolerate a little bit of some grubs, let them be in your garden. Okay. These are some examples that are popular for use as biomass. So, annual wildflowers, our native ones, do a great job of creating a lot of biomass. They live a quick season, they grow fast, and then they die, they dry up, and then they create their own mulch. So I have poppy, lobe mallow, some of our native ones. Yellow bells is a really nice, beautiful landscape plant that actually creates a lot of biomass as well, both with the trimmings and the deciduous nature of it. Sunflowers, asters, nasturtium, yarrow, lupine, comfrey. I'm saying these in case you can't see them. And temporary bean, which is biomass. I don't know if I have a slide on living mulches, but some of these plants serve multiple purposes. So you can go to the next one. Yes. So we also have a class of plants for biomass, and then the soil drillers. So if you have compaction or you need to create some more aeration in your soil, you can get yourself some soil drills, like daikon radish, something that grows a big long taproot that can break up the soil. And a lot of early succession plants that grow in disturbed soil sites. A lot of those plants have a big, like strong root, like dandelions have a big taproot. They can break into these concrete-like environments and break up that soil for you. Mustards are good at that. Sunflowers have worked really well for me as breaking up soils. And yeah, all of these. Comfrey is it. I put that on there. I haven't grown a lot of comfrey in my own garden because I'm not sure it's like as good for our climate. But it's like the permaculture favorite, so I feel like I just have to put it in. But does anyone grow comfrey? I have some seeds, I can be growing it. And I know it's available in some of our local nurseries to buy comfrey. But it is a really great biomass plant that grows quickly and is great for adding into your compost piles, into your chop and drop situations. So anyways, comfrey's a good one too, but still need experiment. Okay, soil lists we talked about at the beginning. Soil list is great for containers because it's really lofty and it can be comprised of a lot of different ingredients. So here's a list of ingredients that can go into a soilless mix. And I do want to say sometimes it has some sand. Some people incorporate sand into their soil list. So when they say that, it's really the mineral soils that they're leaving out of their mix. That's usually what you buy in your potting soil bags. Is anyone gardening in soilless mixes, like in their raised bed, soilless? Yeah.
I never.
Yeah, it's funny, it's like a misnomer anyway. Like, what the heck is, how do you have something that's soilless? Well, it's the cocoa coir, the peat moss, the compost, the worm castings for like vermiculite, and sometimes sand, but not always. So, anyways. Okay, let's talk about, we're getting towards the end here, so I don't even know how to do that. Cool, pretty okay. Look, I'm just talking rapidly.
No, we're
That's
good.
fine.
You're good. You're good.
Perfect. Let's look for some soil problems, and then I know people are gonna have individual problems, so we shouldn't do that.
We have a lot of individual.
Yeah, we could probably be here for, like, get our sleeping bags out and like have a sleepover and talk about all our soil problems. Okay, so common soil problems in the desert, we have hit on some of these. We've talked about pH balance. A lot of us deal with the high alkalinity. We talked about how rainwater is great for this. And then also when we don't have that access to rainwater, I recommend like a soil, like a water flush of your system to help leach some of that accumulated salts, the evaporates, and I don't know how much it's going to help with alkalinity, but I have good results by leaching and doing maybe a double cycle of your irrigation, whether you're hand watering or you have drip irrigation, double the time for your irrigation cycle and let that leach out beyond your typical root zone where you're typically watering. So instead of 2 feet deep in your, or like 12 inches in your raised bed, you want it to go down 24 and get those salts to kind of get flushed out. And so if we're not getting rains, maybe once every 3 months could be like a prescription for that. Or anytime you feel like you're seeing some problems and you're not quite sure what to do, maybe just give your garden a nice flush. Okay. Compaction, we talked about the soil drillers, biomass, incorporating, you need to incorporate air. And that might mean some manual, broad forking, creating pockets, digging is usually, there's some manual labor involved. I showed you my that garden bed that I had a problem with the compaction in the beginning. We actually had to buy a jackhammer for the layer of the caliche and the compaction issue that we had there. So we took the manual labor to the next level with mechanical. Okay. Low nitrogen, just keep adding organic material. Add in nitrogen fixing plants to your gardens. Intercrop with nitrogen fixing plants. So these are legumes, our beans. I'm thinking of some of our, I mean, for us, it's everywhere. Yes, it's our mesquites, our palo verdes. These are all beautiful art dahlias. Anything that have those like multi little tiny leaves that stick out from the leaf, like the little leaflets. Those are usually a nitrogen fixing plant if you're not quite sure. But we want to be putting in those nitrogen fixers. You let them grow. You can let them seed. You can also harvest them and then break that material back into the soil, or you can chop them before they even bloom to incorporate it. High salts, if you have a high salt content, you also need to leach your soil, just as in trying to fix a pH balance with no rain. We do our best, add organic material. Our city water is what it is. And pests and disease, we could go on forever. I don't know if my next slide has information. Okay, no, go back one. Okay, handling pests and diseases is really going to help you to be, got to confuse your pests and confuse your garden by rotating your crops or interplanting your crops. Some of us have really small spaces that we're gardening in, and so it's not always realistic to be like to like retire your bed from tomatoes for an entire season. So you have to think of ways to confuse your soil. So try mixing up the types of species that you're putting in your garden so that you can bring biodiversity. Because the more often you plant that same plant in the same place, you're going to encourage that disease to live there and to like get really comfy in that new home that it's created. It's like, oh, I can predict this. This is going to be here. I'm going to increase my numbers. But if you confuse it by putting in another plant, it'll there's like different relationships. I feel like we'll get into some one-on-one conversations about some. My example is root knot nematodes. Has anyone had a problem with those before? What? Root knot nematodes. Yes. I have them in my garden, in one of my areas of my garden. And so that's like a years long, so long-term process of like, how did they get here? Well, they just exist in our soils naturally as well. You know, you can't always prevent the diseases. They're going to come. Hopefully not that one. I bless you all with great soil energy in this room to not have those. So I'm practicing doing cover cropping with mustard. Like mustards really repel, marigolds repel nematodes. So there's certain crops that work against or help kind of balance those numbers. I'm never going to get rid of that. I have come to terms with that. But I can cover crop with mustards every summer. I can do a lot of tepary. Things that aren't impacted right now are the tepary bean, the sunflowers, cosmos, marigolds. I can still grow a lot of things, but my production for vegetable crops are down. So in the winter, after I do the mustard, I'll be able to grow vegetables like cabbage and radishes. Okay, I think we've talked about this, so we're going to keep going. We've talked about all of those things. These are just some examples of things you can do for your composting. That's another class, so we'll just keep going. And then other resources, let's see. What else? I feel like I talked about all these. I think I talked about all these. Okay, so we can just go through there. Okay, and I wanted you to know some of the resources I get my information from. I really appreciate research-based information. Anecdotes are wonderful, like what worked in your garden, talking about what works in my garden. But also the University of Arizona is a great resource and research-based, as well as many other universities around the country. And so one, that's like where I get a lot of my information is the U of A. And then these are just some of my permaculture books that I have from my library that I use to research all these things. So, okay, that's it. We did it. Okay, so we have books. Oh, the books, yeah. And I put that in really fast, so I can see I still.
Okay, so it is time for questions and answers. You have what starts that?
Yeah. Is bag one okay, or does that need composted down?
That one was wonderful. That's like one of my favorite things. You don't need to compost back one.
And also.
Do you scrape it from your patio?
No, I didn't have that, that's funny.
Either way, it's fine.
I've also tried to acidify my soils by using these alfalfa cutups. And I dropped my pH from 7.5 when I first got the bed down to 6.5.
Amazing.
And I used it again with some other fertilizer that had micronutrients, so keeping it just about 6.5, 6.8.
That's beautiful. Yes, I've experimented with using alfalfa pellets that you can get in livestock bags to add a quick source of nitrogen and to fluff up your soils really well.
It lowers the pH a little bit other than using sulfur.
That's great. Thank you for that.
I'm using potatoes with them, long.
Yeah. Mhm. Those things can temporarily reduce pH, and it's hard to see long-term impacts for something like that. That could be like, oh, I need to help this plant right now. So it could have a little, but long-term solutions are really, it's trickier when we're struggling with high pH. Yeah, thank you. I'm assuming that's picking up people pursue, so I don't need to read you.
No,
Yeah, okay. Okay, sure.
do you have any thoughts on the impact of like organic fertilizers, like a plant line on biome? Does it hurt out?
Yes, so organic fertilizers, I'm a huge proponent of low numbers in your fertilizer, the NPK, those 3 numbers on your fertilizer bag. The lower those numbers and look at your ingredients, you'll find things like Aquano and like seabirds, feathers, whatever they're using, like, what can I think of right now? They're using organic, naturally occurring materials to feed your biome. It's not feeding the plants. So when you find those synthetic fertilizers, which will feed the plant directly, like the root, it's hitting the roots directly. And that also works and it's feeding your plant. So you see something right away. But that's not supporting the biome as much. It's just like, so both have their spots, Yeah, it's a great question.
My question is, if you said root knots with a K.
Oh, yeah.
Rocks with an R. I mean, is it
Root knot, KNOT, root knot. Okay, so symptoms for a root knot nematode. You've noticed your plant is rapidly or even slowly declining. For me, it happens in the summer with my tomatoes, mostly tomatoes, melons. You'll see they just look terrible. Like, what? It must be the heat. But then you pull up roots, and the root is like porky and spongy. And it could be confusing because it has little nodules on it. And you think those nodules are like, that's nitrogen fixing bacteria. No, it's not. It's the nematodes. So you're looking for that porky, weird root growth.
So follow up. So I've had some trouble with plants. Losing and they need more water.
Yes.
What they do is more water. Like, nope, then I'll pull it up. There's all these big fat juicy grubs under there.
Yeah.
But grubs don't eat living roots, right?
They're decomposing material.
Something else is still in the plant, and the grubs are like, "Woo, party!"
Likely, yeah. And it could be you have a lot of water. It could be a symptom of some overwatering potentially. And so there's a lot of decaying happening or some anaerobic activity happening potentially. And that's attracting grubs and it's eating the stuff around. Or your roots are rotting and it's coming and eating those rotting roots from. Yeah. Or it's all fast, yeah.
Or it could be root knots insects.
It could. I wouldn't say you would necessarily find the grubs in with the root knot nematodes, but probably maybe. Really look for that symptom of the roots, the corky, of the roots, yeah.
How do you improve your legal adults? It's really good.
They can hear you good.
I'm sure.
Yes, this is great because I practice no-till. However, sometimes I'm like, I kind of want to till a little bit. And so I think instead of using no-till, we can use minimal disturbance. And so I think ways that we can protect the biome, protect that no-till concept is doing things like broad forking. Because broad forking, have you guys seen those things? It's like it's not for the faint of heart if your soil is really compacted, but it has like the 2 big poles and it has like these 4 prongs that are pretty large at the end. And you like get on this thing, you pull back, and it just kind of lifts the soil really gently. So other ways I've done this in like a real small scale, like in my raised beds, I've like taken a chopstick and like I poke holes in the soil just to bring it into the air and see like, okay, I need to poke around in there. And if you think about it, when you're transplanting things, you're digging holes. So if you're just kind of doing a minimal disturbance, I think that's a nice way to protect that.
There's some kind of great long another piece of thing. Like a shovel, still got
I think that's the problem. Or like a pitchfork could work
a
too.
pitchfork,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever you got, you don't have to buy the fancy equipment, I'm not into like buy all the fancy stuff. It's fun to have it all, but if you use what you have.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Oh, you don't know.
Later.
Okay, can you use this vermiculite on perlite inorganic and use that gardens?
Perlite is a material that I believe is mined. So it's probably, is that what you're asking?
Perlite. Perlite,
Perlite,
Are you asking if it's organic?
yeah, and you can use in the garden.
I believe, yes, I think there is perlite that's wrongly listed, so you're looking for that organic label. But it is like a material, it probably floats between. Like. It doesn't, it's not living itself, it's like a rock.
Yeah.
But incorporating as an amendment in an organic garden where you use organic methods. I would say look for perlite that's being responsibly like harvested. Is probably my best answer there, I don't know, how's that sound? So like good answer. Good answer, bad answer.
So,
the tanks have that, like.
They do, yeah, horticultural grade perlite is, and they come in different sizes.
I got four basic in my backyard, they're about a year old. Dug them out and I graded sort of then I added wood chip.
Hmm.
But I wanted to add more organic materials. I brush away the little wood chips, put down organic material and put the wood chip back over.
Oh gosh, you have choices. What's your goal in the basins? What are you growing?
Wildflowers.
Okay, yeah, I would say,
Eventually I'll put in some grains.
okay, I think if you're doing more like perennials, wildflowers, you could probably, depending on how thick your layer of mulch is. So mulch can be a weed suppressant, which also means it could suppress your wildflowers. So you still need some bare soils for those things to make contact. But if you're working on regenerating the soil first, then I would see how much decomposition has happened under those wood chips and see if you want to add a little bit more compost. But I would probably scrape it away. I would add the compost and put the wood chips back is what I would do in that situation.
thank you.
Coconut coir. Yeah, do you have a specific question or just my opinion on the product at large? Coconut coir, what I understand, it's more sustainable than say peat moss. Is that one of the thoughts on? However, I know there is some regenerative techniques for harvesting peat moss, or peat in bogs. There's like things, so I think sometimes that's like taken to the extreme in peat. And then coconut coir, I think is still processed in a way where it can contain a lot of added salts because of the way they process that material. And so you might want to look at products that have a lower salt reputation. I don't know if they have like Pro Coco is what I use, and they have a reputation of having a lower salt content. And so I use that in my mixes.
Does anyone else have any questions? The low salt.
Oh, Pro Coco, it's a local product. I think they're still making that here.
Yeah.
Pro, Pro, Pro. There's another guy who is in Phoenix. He comes to our fair.
Onville,
Onville.
and Pro Coco is made by EcoCorp. That's
Oh.
their product.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. great.
They own, I think, a place in Suriname where they actually. Yeah,
You've heard of the source milk.
yeah, so that's
Nice.
EcoGrow.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Another, woo.
Do you use any biotar?
Ooh, biochar, that is like the hot new thing. Okay, I wanna learn how to use biochar, so that's like something I wanna learn how to do on my site. Like how to make it myself. But biochar is interesting where it's a charcoal that is made in an anaerobic environment. So it's not just like your wood ash or the charcoal you find in your fire pit. So biochar itself is neutral. But when you add a nutrient solution to it, it absorbs it really well. And it can be used to rehabilitate soils really nicely. So I'm still learning about it, but that's what I understand.
We did a biochar presentation about a year and a half ago, and that is on our YouTube channel
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
and the web, and the website. Okay, and the website. So that was a very informative class.
Oh, yeah,
So
that'd be awesome.
just to let you know, you can get more information on our YouTube channel /website on that biochar presentation that was done. It was really good.
Also, Awareness Ranch makes and sells biochar at the Villito Farmers Market on Sundays, and I think they do biochar classes.
Hello.
Yeah, so we need to meet Awareness Ranch.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions before we wrap?
And I can stay a little bit after if you wanted to do the raffle if somebody say. Oh, other burning questions.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us in person and online. Did everybody get around ticket? Yes, okay, so today we're giving out a bag of inch by inch worm castings that Kathleen brings up for us at inch by inch. Title like trees, nobody for their friend. Who has more mulberry trees for sale? Oh,